Well, it took over a day, but I managed to win my first game of the Chess.com Daily Chess Championships of 2021. I wanted to just share with you this particular game. It was just a short game. My opponent's, credit to him, he played as best as he could, but obviously was 800 points lower rated than I was. But I think it was still quite an instructive game, just showing you some ways to be able to exploit your opponent's positions, particularly when they make certain moves that weaken their position. So I was playing on the white side. The game started e4, e5, knight f3, knight to c6. So we entered into a Ruy Lopez Spanish game. And here my opponent played probably the first mistake of the game. And that was the move f6. Now, interestingly enough, this has actually got a name for a variation, which I didn't believe at first. But it's true. This thing is called the Nuremberg variation. There's not a whole amount of games from this position. The only games I could find were in fact just from the 19th century. Funny enough, I think this has been played by Wilhelm Steinitz, the first world champion, and also Manuel Lasker, the second world champion. So maybe it's not as bad as I thought it was. But I guess we can kind of objectively say that this is not a great move for my opponent. It does defend e5, but I'll show you in a minute a better way to defend this pawn. Interestingly, as I say, it is not a total disaster just yet. I can still go wrong in this variation. But for any beginners watching, why would I say f6 is not a great move? Well, it's threefold. Number one, it's important to note at the start of the game that the f-pawn is the weakest point in your position. If I just go back, essentially the way that I can prove this is if you count how many pieces defend a certain piece from the board, the f-pawn is a special case at the start of the game. So let's go through it. So you can see here the a-pawn is defended by the rook. The b-pawn is defended by the bishop, so that's defended once. The c-pawn is defended by the queen. Now the d-pawn and the e-pawn, quite special, are defended by a number of pieces. So 4 pieces for the d-pawn, and for the e-pawn you've also got 4 pieces. The f-pawn is defended by the king, g-pawn defended by the bishop, and the h-pawn defended by the rook. Now, why is the f-pawn the weakest? I mean, we can certainly make the same case for all of these pawns as well. Well, the f-pawn is special because the only piece that defends it is the king, right? So the problem with the king being the only defender means that if I'm able to attack it with 2 or more pieces, I'm going to be able to take that pawn without any retaliation. So I'll just show you a quick example of what I mean. Let's just say I'm going to play as made up position here. Let's just say do this and ignore the fact the queen can capture. But let's just say I have this position. Now here I can capture either with the bishop or with the knight, and I'm not going to have any retaliation here. Notice that the king cannot capture this knight because the bishop defends it. Vice versa, if I take with the bishop, the king cannot capture back because the knight defends it. Now against any of the other squares, we could capture back. Might not be the best move, but we can actually retaliate to that particular threat by capturing back with pieces. The f-pawn is the only exception, as obviously we won't be able to attack it because it puts our king into danger. So that's point number one. So going back to the position, so the second point I want to make and I want to stress is whenever you make a pawn move, there's always a weakness that's left behind it. So in this case, by moving this f-pawn, we've created some light square weaknesses around this pawn. So by doing this, we can actually create a lot of vulnerabilities for this king by opening up this light square flank. So we might get a queen there or something. We could even use this bishop to take control of this. Annoyingly, later in the position as well, if we're looking to castle with the king, this obviously exposes the light square, so it could end up going into a check, or worse, if the bishop comes here, it would actually impede the king from actually castling on the king's side. So that's the second point. The third point, in the opening is it's always important when you make pawn moves, it should be to enable the development. So let's just show you from here. This move, both these pawn moves. So okay, you can make the argument around that it's leaving weakness, but they actually do some things. They enable our development. They control the center and they enable our development. So we can now get our knights out. We can get this bishop out. We're one step closer from castling, and vice versa for black. By playing this, he's now one step closer from being able to castle, get his pieces out very quickly. Now, if I return back to this position, this f pawn doesn't do anything for black's position. Okay, it defends this pawn, but it actually impedes black's development. This knight would love to come to this f square because that's a natural square. From there, it can control the center beautifully. It can attack this pawn on e4. That's why it's the natural square. The bishop, we could make the argument that actually this f6 pawn hinders the scope of this bishop. Normally in a lot of Ruy Lopez's you'll tend to see this bishop come to e7, and by playing f6 it's obstructing its view. It can't come out to h4 or control any of these squares because this pawn is in the way. So we can make that argument as well. In some cases, maybe not all the cases, but it also, I guess, impedes the development of the queen as well. So maybe this queen might want to come out to this diagonal. I'm not saying it should, but this pawn restricts that development as well. So it restricts the scope of that as well. Now, here's where things get interesting. Now, black is actually safe in this position for now because this knight controls this pawn. If I go back a couple moves, there's actually a very famous variation. It's sort of a frowned upon variation called the Diano defense. It's named after an Italian player from I think the 17th century. In fact, it's sad that it's been named after him because he was actually the one to show that this position wasn't very good for black. So interestingly enough, although this pawn defends this pawn on e5, white has a very nifty tactic here. He can actually capture this. And I know that sounds hard to believe, but the point is after this pawn captures back, regaining the knights, and it looks like he's winning material, the queen can come to h5, and black is in horrible danger now, because if he ever plays, let's say g6, queen takes. Notice this king and this rook are under attack. So that's really bad. And if the king comes forward, let's say, well, this is no good for black as well. Queen can capture here. Let's say the king comes to f7. Bishop can come to c4, and it's a pretty miserable position for black. He's going to get almost checkmated by force. In fact, the best line here for black is to try and give up material back. Now white has regained all the lost material he has, and he's still got a mating attack to hand here. So definitely something that black wants to avoid as much as he can. So yeah, it's interesting because, as I say, this knight, for the time being, I can't actually do this move because obviously the knight defends it. But it was interesting because I was kind of going, I recognised that pattern from somewhere, and I was thinking about the Diano. So, right, what is a better move for black here? Well, there's a number of different variations that black can play. Interestingly enough, black doesn't need to worry about defending this pawn. Now that sounds a bit strange. You may think, okay, this is a threat, he captures here, the pawn captures back. Well, white can just simply win this pawn, right? Well, let me just show you. a6 is the best move. So this is the most popular way to play in this variation known as the Morphy defense. This is the point. If bishop captures, which looks really good, then pawn can capture back. After which, the knight, if he captures here on e5, this is in fact a mistake, because queen can come to d4, a really powerful move. Now it's funny enough, in my second ever classical game that I played, and we're talking maybe 12-13 years ago, I was playing the white side of this position, and I got thrashed pretty quickly here, because now, well, white has to do something here. He's going to lose his knight or his pawn. In the game that I played 12-13 years ago, I decided to continue capturing here, but this was no good, as after queen captures, I think my opponent just moved his queen up, and after this exchange he was happy to take my knight away, and I had a totally lost position here. So going back, white can play knight to f3, after which the queen recaptures the material that he'd lost, and he's got a very good position as well. Notice here that whatever white does here, he's going to be unable to castle in this position. So if he comes to f1, well, this white king can no longer castle. He can no longer get himself safe in the corner of the position and get his pieces to the center and activate this rook. And also, if this queen came to e2, well, a similar problem for him. He's going to have this issue. So, as I say, very interesting that black can do that. Other ways he can defend this pawn, knight to f6 as a result, is also a very good move. For the same reasons that we've just seen, white can't capture this because he's saved tactically in this position. Another move, funnily enough, I've spoken about f6 being a bad move. f5 is actually a good move. Would you believe it? The Schliemann defense. Now, I've told you that moving the f-pawn is bad, but this move is a weird exception. I've covered this in actually great detail on my YouTube channel. I'll put a recommendation in the top of this video if you do want to check that out. I don't want to explain this variation in too much detail at this point. Now, going back. So, we had f6, so that was played in the game. Now, I'd had a look at the database, and I had a look at the Kibitzer recommendations on the opening thing, just to sort of get an idea what's the whole point in this variation. Now there was one game that was shared which went a bit like this. Basically, the bishop captured here, and it tried to come up with a tactic of, if let's say b takes, then do we get a dynamo defense after this? The problem is the bishop on f1 is no longer there, so it actually doesn't work. So if he captures here, black is just better. So after queen here, if let's say king to e7, okay, black can't castle. After we capture here, king comes to f7. He actually is fine. He doesn't have to worry about the bishop coming to c4, where it would be checking the king. So that doesn't quite work. Very interestingly as well, if he takes this way, black is in fact, this f6 move is actually not bad at all now, as after castles I should say, black in fact is able to transpose into a known variation of the Rye-Lopez exchange. After a6, he's actually reached his position by transposition, and this is a very common line in the Rye-Lopez exchange called the Gligerich variation. Again, he doesn't actually have to play a6 to transpose in that. I actually think bishop c5 is probably even an improvement. He doesn't have to waste a tempo putting his pawn to a6, although to be fair, it will probably end up moving anyway to give an escape square for the bishop. So, very interesting. So I've still got to be careful in this variation. I could just lose my entire advantage straight away if I'm not careful. So in the actual game, I castled, which I think is the best, most principled move. Getting on with my development, getting my rook developed as well. Now here, black decides to break another opening principle. He moves the same piece twice, but I guess he does so in attacking my bishop. So I guess I've got to react to that. So I put my bishop to c4, which, to be fair, is an improvement for me, as now it's aiming down this vulnerable diagonal. b6 is played. Okay, this is quite a weak move. It's not realizing the danger, I think, for my opponent here, because now I'm able to go into that Diano variation that I showed you at the start. Here I decide to capture here at last. The knight no longer defends on e5, so by doing this my opponent then captured f takes on e5. He's got to, otherwise he's just down a pawn, and also if he does anything else, well, this knight is aiming to come into f7 with the support of this bishop. So again, exploiting this weak f square. F takes on e5, queen comes to h5, and here my opponent put his king to e7. He doesn't want to play g6 because this would end in a check and him losing his rook. So he goes here instead. Queen to f7 with check, king to d6, and it's interesting this position because black has got a weird counter threat here of taking on c2, which would trap the rook here. So I felt for quite some long time, I was like, I should have a win here, but I just couldn't see a good way to win this position. If queen to d5 check, and the king comes back to e7, the best move according to the engines is capturing here, after which if the knight captures on c2, well, d4 can be played. White just aims to try and open up the position as best he can because this king is stuck in the center. And if, let's say, the knight captures on a1, this would be an immediate blunder, as now the bishop can come here, and after knight to f6, you can then play this move, exploiting the fact that this knight can't move because you've pinned it with your bishop. In actual fact, the only way to save this position, at least stop mate m1, is to play queen to e8 to stop it from coming here, after which you win this pawn. You're going to win this knight very, very soon. If the king runs back to d8, you now take here, and this is a pretty crushing position for black. I'm already threatening just to capture this and force black to lose some more material. So just for example, if let's say g takes f6, I capture here, this king is trapped. If he puts his bishop to e7, well, I take this rook, and I've got a very good position here. I could, if I wanted to, I think here, just play this move. I think that's sufficient to get a winning advantage, forcing off more material. White in this position is up an exchange, and he's also up a pawn as well. So I think this is a relatively comfortable position to get an edge in. We're going back. So what happened in the actual game? Well, in this position, I played f4. So I wanted to just simply threaten to capture here and open up lines for my rook as well. Again, it's interesting here, black had some way to maybe come back in this position. c6 actually saves him slightly, and it's hard to believe. The point being, if I captured this pawn, which is very good, the king can tuck into c7. Now I've got a little bit of a problem on my hands. I've got to try and defend against this threat, but also try and come up with some attack here and justify the fact that I sacrificed my knight. I'm still down a pawn here in this position. So the line that the computer recommends is actually capturing the bishop, after which, after bishop queen captures, rook captures, the knight can take on c2, getting ready to win the rook. Well, white just has to get on with whatever counterplay he can. If the knight captures here, okay, it's weird. White has got a big lead in development here, which is probably the only good thing about his position, but he's actually down an entire well, actually I'd say, is it a entire rook? Yeah, he's down an entire rook in this position, or 4 points of material, I should say. So, you know, if you want to play this on the black side, by all means. I personally wouldn't want to, but it doesn't look too bad for black here. So going back, so f4 actually is a blunder, but it does start unleashing threats on black if he's not careful. Well, My opponent just played another blunder here. Unfortunately, he puts his knight to e2, delivering a check, but forgetting the fact that this knight is now on pre. I take back with a bishop. E takes on f4. I flung my d pawn forward. Wasn't any rush to take this because now I'm threatening to get another piece into the game, and I've got all types of checks. So he put his bishop to b7. I captured this pawn. The king came to c6, the only move, and then finally queen checkmate on d5. So it was a really interesting position, and I don't, I'm not going to attack my opponent here. I think he played as best as he could. He obviously tried to react to some of the threats that I was dishing out early on in the game. But it's a very interesting position, as I say. Lots of things to think about. Lots of things to think about in terms of weaknesses and how to exploit them, especially if they play early moves like f6. But anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video. I'll hopefully post some more of my analysis on the daily tournaments for 2021 soon. But otherwise, thank you for watching, and I'll see you soon. Take care.